Welcome to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. This episode, we're going to be talking about the criminal injustice of cannabis prohibition. Did you know that it's illegal to smoke marijuana in Missouri? With me, I have a guest who's going to be talking about the issues related to that. I have John Payne, who is a director of Show-Me Cannabis. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Don. Good to be here.
Now, tell me this. In Missouri, is very much money spent on budgets related to cannabis prohibition? It's probably over $1,000 a year.
Oh yeah, it's well over $1,000. Actually, we did a study with Jeff Myron, who's a professor at Harvard University, and also something of an expert on the economics of prohibition. And he determined that the state of Missouri spends about $90 million.
$90 million?
Yes, $90 million.
Making sure people don't smoke weed.
Yes, and that's just the law enforcement budget. That doesn't take into account any of the other agencies of the state that have some interaction there. And it also doesn't take into account the lost revenue that the state could be getting if it were legalized and taxed in a manner similar to alcohol, and he estimates that at about $60 million. So it's a combined $150 million.
Right, and there's $90 million spent and potentially $60 million lost.
Right.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think it takes away anything from the law enforcement agency's ability to prosecute more serious crimes like murder or driving while intoxicated or things like that?
Absolutely. You know, there's just talking about it in monetary terms does sort of distract from perhaps the more important issue, and that's the opportunity cost of what law enforcement is doing. Because every minute that they spend arresting somebody for cannabis is a minute that they're not out there pursuing somebody for rape, robbery, murder, the sorts of things that I think we would all agree are more serious than somebody using cannabis. And so, you know, it's hard to know exactly how many crimes we miss out on prosecuting because of cannabis prohibition rather, but we do know this. In the state of Missouri, only about half of all rape cases are charges ever brought against somebody. Murder cases, we do better, it's about 80%. Property crime cases, it's actually really, really low. It's about 20% of cases in any sort of property crime is an arrest made and charges brought against an offender. So, you know, for all the people, the 20,000 people we're arresting every year in the state.
Is it 20,000?
Yes, 20,000.
Now, did it go down in 2014 or 2013 or any of the years for which the most recent data is available? Do you know?
I think in Missouri it has trended downward a little bit in the last few years, but it's still, if you at least combining both possession and sales charges, it's still over 20,000 a year in every year that I've looked at.
Well, tell me this. We've talked about what it costs the state, which is a huge amount of money. And so you can think of it either as $150 million that could be spent on law enforcement for things that we all agree, somebody needs to be taken out of circulation for doing it. Or we could look at it as $150 million that our taxes might be lowered, or maybe split it, down the middle. But for people who use marijuana, either because they use it medicinally, they have an illness which they feel that they really need marijuana for, maybe somebody's actually prescribed marijuana from another state and they're moving to Missouri because they need to live here, or because people just want to enjoy it. So what are the consequences? What are the costs for that person as a person who's arrested for smoking marijuana?
It can be tremendous, and obviously the first thing is that they can be deprived of their life and their liberty. They can be incarcerated. Now, it's not typical for somebody on a small possession charge to be incarcerated for a long period of time. They're not. If you just have a joint, you're probably not going to go to prison over it, but you might be in the county jail for a day, 2 days, a week, a month. That's certainly not unheard of, and that can really disrupt somebody's life. That's something that can cause them to lose a job because they aren't able to show up for work. And then it's also, if they get convicted, now they have this criminal offense on their record that will make it harder for them to get employment down the road.
At the state level, in most parts of Missouri, is possession of marijuana a felony or a misdemeanor?
It's a misdemeanor below 35 grams.
Oh, so if you have a small amount, about what's 35 grams? If you had marijuana on your baggie, about what would
that's
that be?
About 1.25 ounces.
Okay.
So it's a fairly, for a personal amount, it's a fairly large amount, but it certainly even people that just use it personally will probably at some point be in possession of more than that. So it's not a huge amount by any means.
Oh, okay. But what if somebody has more than that? What would the crime be?
Then it would be a felony. It's a low-level felony, but a felony nonetheless. And it's something that they can be punished for up to 7 years in prison.
Up to 7 years.
Yeah, and it's 1 year even for the misdemeanor.
1 year for the misdemeanor. So it could be quite a bit of jail time, but of course the greater problem for most people is that if you are arrested for possession of marijuana, then you could lose your job. You, of course, lose your source of income, and if people depend on you for your source of income, that could be absolutely devastating. And then you don't necessarily have an opportunity to get the same level of job whenever you might have to settle for a much worse job if you can get one when you do get out of jail.
Yes, and also you can lose your ability to, if you're a young person or someone trying to get back into school, you can lose your ability to get federal financial aid for schooling. And that seems like it's not helping the situation at all. If a person's trying to go to school and better themselves, and we say, oh, well, but you used cannabis, so now therefore we're going to keep you out of school and make it harder for you to find employment. This is not helping that person. It's not helping society.
Absolutely. I know that the laws are less odious, less bad than they were decades ago. I remember when I was growing up in Texas, the third offense of giving marijuana to a minor was the death penalty. It was classified as a narcotic. And so like if a guy smoked marijuana with his girlfriend and she was under 18, then, and that was his third offense, that could on the books, it could result in the death penalty.
That is rather extreme, but I will say that it's it's still in the state of Missouri. There is at least one person that we know of that is serving a sentence of life without parole for a cannabis-only nonviolent offense.
Really? What was was it possession or sales or what?
The last one was he was indicted on a conspiracy to distribute, but there was no specific charge that he was actually partaking in a sale at that time. Okay. But he was caught in leaving a hotel room with another person who everyone admits was the bigger fish in this whole thing.
Right.
And they had 7 pounds of cannabis total. And he had 2 prior offenses, which were both cannabis only, and those were possession and low-level possession charges. Okay. One was a very small distribution charge. But because of those prior offenses, he was tried as a prior and persistent drug offender. Oh. And that allowed them to give him a sentence that was without parole automatically.
So it was just cannabis. He wasn't selling crack, or he wasn't selling heroin or meth or anything. He was just, and of course, 7 pounds of marijuana. That's a good amount of marijuana, but it's not going to buy you a Rolls Royce.
No, not at all. This is hardly a drug kingpin. The gentleman's name is Jeff Mazansky, and he's originally from the Sedalia area. He's been in prison now for about 21 years, and it's just a gross miscarriage of justice.
That is incredible to put somebody in jail for that long a time. Now, but it's not. You say we've seen it's not as bad as it used to be. But in some places in Missouri, it's even less. Like is it the city of St. Louis and the city of Columbia that have less strict laws now? So what are those laws like?
So basically, the city of Columbia and the city of St. Louis have both taken steps to sort of decriminalize the possession of small amounts of cannabis. Now, that doesn't mean that it's legal. It just means that there are no longer criminal penalties associated with possession of under 35 grams in municipal courts.
Now, so what does that mean that it's not?
Criminal.
It's not criminal, but it's illegal. I'm not following that.
So there are a lot of things that are that are not criminal but aren't legal. So, for instance, speeding. If you get a speeding ticket, that's not a criminal offense. It's not something that goes on your criminal record. Society does not view you differently fundamentally.
So, if you're applying for a job, and you say, "Have you been arrested for a criminal offense?" If I've probably gotten 5 or 6 tickets in my life, I can say no, because I was not speeding.
Precisely.
I was speeding, but I was not doing something more serious. And so marijuana would be like, in the city of St. Louis and Columbia, marijuana would be like that in the sense that you can be convicted, pay a fine, can you go to jail in the city of St. Louis and Columbia?
No, jail time has been eliminated for those offenses for under 35 grams, first-time offenses, and actually, I believe in Columbia it's also subsequent offenses. Jail time has been eliminated for that offense. You can pay a fine, but the judge is actually instructed to give you a suspended imposition of sentence, which is a kind of probation where if nothing else happens, then you come back to the court will, it's not expunged, but the records will not be publicly available.
Okay,
so there is no criminal record of the event, and it's essentially they don't even, it's not supervised probation, but if you during that time period commit another offense, then the sentence can come back and be.
Okay, let's take a break. We are going to take a look at the trailer to a very old movie called Reefer Madness, just a brief part of it, but it shows part of the scare that went on in the first efforts to criminalize marijuana. We'll take a look at that, and then we'll be right back.
The deadly narcotic, more deadly, is the menace of marijuana.
We are the Junior Black Chamber of Commerce, an organization that's creating the business leaders of tomorrow. Catch our new television series, Harambe 101, on Green Time TV. We want to thank all the business professionals who gave up their time mentoring what promises to be the next generation of movers and shakers. You too can help save the future of our underserved communities by supporting the Junior Black Chamber of Commerce with your charitable contributions. And remember, what you give today will help make a brighter future tomorrow.
Send your donations to the JBCC at P.O. Box 35257, St. Louis, Missouri 63135.
The Sierra Club is the largest and most influential grassroots environmental organization in the United States. If you care about clean air, clean water, and preserving open space, join the Sierra Club. In Missouri, the Sierra Club's projects include promoting energy efficiency and clean power sources like wind and solar, cleaning up air pollution by retiring dirty, outdated, coal-fired power plants, protecting Missouri's parks like the Ozark National Scenic Riverways. We need you to get more involved. To join the Sierra Club, make a donation, or to find out about Sierra Club events in your area, visit our website at www.missouri.sierraclub.org or call us at 314-644-1011.
Welcome back to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. This episode we're talking about the criminal injustice of cannabis prohibition. I have with me a guest who is John Payne, who is executive director of Show-Me Cannabis. John, the viewers just had a chance to see a little bit of Reefer Madness. Could you tell us, now, was marijuana always illegal for, ever since America was a country, and even before that in medieval Europe? And is it just a continuation, or was marijuana made illegal? And if so, What happened, to make it illegal?
Yeah, there was actually a huge shift here because originally people grew cannabis. They didn't yet call it marijuana, but people grew cannabis very commonly even in colonial times and in post-revolutionary America. They grew it for hemp to provide textiles and provide food, etc.
Wasn't hemp rope very
Yes.
common? Okay.
And that was one of the major uses. But you can use hemp for all sorts of different things. And it was used pretty much throughout the colonies. In fact, some colonies had laws requiring that people grow it originally. And people would have been really taken aback even in the early 1900s and 1930s when they started to ban marijuana, but they would have been taken aback if you had told them they were going to ban cannabis. You see, there was actually the word marijuana really was kind of a scare tactic in and of itself. Because what was going on is this was sort of rooted in racism and the dislike of Mexican immigrants. And so Mexican immigrants were coming into the United States, and most Americans who use cannabis, and quite a few people did use it medically. There are all sorts of products that were sold using extracts of cannabis by people all across America. But very few people at the time smoked marijuana or smoked cannabis. But Mexican immigrants did. And so it was that behavior that alarmed white Americans in the early 1900s. And they wanted a way to, crack down on Mexican immigrants who they did not like. And so they instead of just going after making a law saying that Mexicans could not immigrate to the United States, they said, all right, well, we'll go after this marijuana. And so by calling it marijuana, it gave it this foreign, scary sound to a lot of Americans.
But wasn't it called marijuana in Mexico at the time?
Yes, it was. I mean, it was. They were taking the Spanish word for cannabis.
Okay.
But in the United States, if you would have said cannabis, people would have known at that time. They would have known much more what you were talking about than if you said marijuana. Marijuana was just something that was associated with Mexicans, and a lot of people did not realize that they were the same plant.
Well, okay. Let me ask you something. I don't know if you have heard of this, but I've heard that all the time that there was jazz, as long as there's been jazz music, that jazz musicians who were largely black would smoke marijuana.
Yes.
And was there an element of anti-black racism in the criminalization also?
Yes. The Mexican immigrants were the larger group that were using cannabis, but black jazz musicians were definitely another one. And there are actually quotes from some of the earliest prohibitionists like Harry Anslinger, who is the first head of the Bureau of Narcotics, where he basically says that this is marijuana is what fuels jazz and swing and causes black men to try to seek relations with white women. And so it was definitely rooted in fears about miscegenation, and just very racially biased terms were used to promote cannabis prohibition right from the get-go.
Let me ask you this also, but how did that spread to Mexico and Latin America? Because here we are in the 21st century, and countries all over the world prohibit it. And for Uruguay to decriminalize marijuana is seen as a great progressive step, but there must have been a time in the rest of the world where marijuana or cannabis was not illegal either.
Yeah, that's true. And I'm not as much of an expert on the history of those laws, but I will say that I know that the United States has played a very major role, especially through the United Nations, in pushing other countries to join anti-drug conventions that they wouldn't otherwise sign on to. And so there have been a lot of cases. This is also true with coca, especially in South America, because down there a lot of the indigenous peoples use the coca leaves, not like we use cocaine, but they'll just take the leaves and chew on them. And a lot of those countries resisted signing these anti-drug conventions, and so the U.S. would come in and strong-arm them and say, oh, well, if you don't want to do that, we'll send troops or we'll cut off aid. And so there's been a lot of we've used a lot of diplomatic and less than diplomatic pressure to achieve our aims and imposing them on the rest of the world.
It is an amazing topic to bully people around, is decriminalizing cannabis. Well, let me ask you this. We talked before about the less penalties in St. Louis and Columbia. I just wonder if there's a state law against marijuana, how can a municipality have an even smaller a smaller penalty if there's a statewide law mandating a larger penalty?
So the state law mandates a range of punishments. It can be, the punishment can be anywhere from one thing to up to another thing. And so in the case of misdemeanor possession charges, that penalty can range from SIS probation to a year in jail, and that's the range of punishment there. Now, what a city can do is they can say, okay, well, in our city, we are going to take an even smaller range. They still have to stay within that range, but they can set.
Okay, it's illegal to have a smaller range.
Right, and so they can say, well, we're going to take away that year penalty, year in jail penalty, and say that it can only be a fine of this amount. Now, they can't go below the state established minimum, though.
Okay.
And so that's also why the cities can't really do anything with charges other than just the misdemeanor possession charges. Because one, those aren't usually tried in city courts, but also because you can't decriminalize something if the state mandates a year.
Columbia and St. Louis would not be able to completely decriminalize marijuana, and that would have to be done at the statewide level.
Yes.
Okay. Now, do you advocate for decriminalizing marijuana totally in the state of Missouri?
Yes, and we advocate beyond that even legalizing cannabis, and those two terms are sometimes used interchangeably. But when I say decriminalization, I'm just talking about the removal of penalties on personal possession. But when I talk about legalization, I'm talking about allowing people, trying to get rid of the black market, allowing people to purchase it, and creating a regulated and taxed market in cannabis. And we do advocate that, and have been pushing for that since we were founded.
Okay, but a regulated market, could that end up keeping marijuana so expensive that people would have to buy it on the black market anyway? I mean, if it's like $600 an ounce or even $200 an ounce, wouldn't it be cheaper just to buy it from a neighborhood drug salesman?
If it's regulated too heavily or taxed too heavily, that is certainly a possibility. And I think there's some of that that we've seen in Colorado since they legalized cannabis in 2012. They opened their markets at the beginning of 2014, and what we saw there is that the price initially was very high because one, there's a 25% tax on cannabis there, and also that there are not that many stores that were open at that point, but more and more stores are being opened all the time as the state processes more licenses. And so I think what we're going to see is as that happens, there's going to be a larger supply, the price is going to fall. But I do think that you make a good point. We have to make sure that we don't tax it and regulate it so heavily that it just encourages the black market to stick around, because that is something we're trying to solve.
Yeah, one of the most irrational arguments I've ever heard about the criminalization of cannabis is that it leads people to using more serious drugs. And of course, if I were selling cocaine or if I were selling heroin, I would want cannabis to be illegal so they would be introduced, because I'd be selling both. But when you decriminalize it, then you break the connection with the person selling the heavier drugs.
That's absolutely true, and that's actually they did a study. I can't remember the exact the authors' names, but this was back in I think 2004. They compared drug users in San Francisco and drug users in the Netherlands, and the Netherlands basically has had a policy of quasi-legalization, de facto legalization for a long time.
Like a coffee.
Yeah. And they found that the people in the Netherlands were less likely to use harder drugs than the drug users in San Francisco. And what they what they argued in the paper was that this is because in the Netherlands, those coffee houses are just selling cannabis.
Right.
Whereas
we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back very shortly to wrap up with some of the major points about the criminal injustice of cannabis prohibition.
Since 1990, the Gateway Green Alliance has worked on environmental and social justice campaigns in St. Louis.
The Gateway Greens have brought dedicated activists to speak at Black and Green Wednesday programs, the annual Pesto Feast, Martin Luther King Day, May Day, and Kwanzaa celebrations.
The Gateway Green Alliance is best known for opposing genetically contaminated foods. We invite activists and scholars from around the world to participate in safe food action and bring their creative art.
We need your support to keep going. Please send your $60 membership check or your $30 low-income check. Best of all, come to a Black and Green Wednesday program, 7:30 p.m. on the first Wednesday of the month at Legacy Books and Cafe.
What if we were served a side of truth?
I'll take a super bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich.
Okay, that'll be meat from a pig who can't even turn around, an egg from a bird kept in a cage so small she can't spread her wings, and the milk of a cow whose calf is taken at birth to make veal. Ma'am?
Welcome back to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. I'm here with John Payne, who's director of Show-Me Cannabis. We're talking about the criminal injustice of cannabis prohibition. John, do you see any parallel between the prohibition of cannabis and the prohibition of alcohol? Do you think it's working very well to criminalize? Does that mean that people don't smoke marijuana because it's illegal?
I don't think there's very many people out there who are not smoking cannabis just because it's illegal. And I think that's what we found was after 75 years of this policy, that much like alcohol prohibition...
There might be people who don't smoke cannabis, but not because of that.
Right.
They just don't want to smoke marijuana.
Exactly.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't think it's been very effective, and I don't think that it's really going to ever be effective. And that's the same thing that we found with alcohol prohibition. Mm-hmm. And it's also fueled a black market that causes a lot of violence. And so, we had Al Capone with alcohol prohibition, and now with cannabis prohibition, we have La Familia and the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico that has killed 60,000 people in that country.
Trying to get a corner of the market on cannabis.
Exactly, and so that's a real problem, and I think we can knock out their share of the market by legalizing it, regulating it, and letting American producers control that market and keep that market here at home in a regulated and safe way.
Okay, well that certainly makes a lot more sense, and if we did that, that would break the connection between things like selling cannabis and selling heroin, selling cocaine, selling meth. The same dealer would not sell a variety of drugs. Cannabis would be left out of that.
Right, and there would also be a lot more quality control because you'd be able to test cannabis for exactly what content of THC is in there, CBD, et cetera. So
John, I got to break you off. I want to thank you for showing up on this show, and I want to thank our viewers for watching. And be sure to watch Green Time the same time next week.